Hello, and welcome to the Freed Black Girl Podcast. This show is a guide to self liberation, pulling the curtain back on healing through the power of storytelling. This show is dedicated to any and everyone doing the work to free their inner child, and for those with a desire and not quite knowing where to begin. My name is Najma Ahmed, and I am the host and creator of the Freed Black Girl podcast. I'll take you on my own journey to liberating the little black girl in me. Thank you for coming along on this ride to our collective freedom. Because as Fannie Lou Hamer said, nobody's free until everybody's free. Hello, and welcome everyone to this very special bonus episode ahead of the election day. This episode is entitled Freed Vote, Protecting Our Rights and Fighting Misinformation on Election Day. I feel so lucky and so honored to have Marcia Johnson here with the League of Women Voters. She is the new chief counsel, and so I would love for you just to introduce yourself before we hop into the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Najma. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And yeah, I just started as the chief counsel at the League of Women Voters, and I've been a voting rights lawyer for 20 years now.
You say some
And
things.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, this is it's my passion. And I always welcome an opportunity to talk about how people can engage in the voting process.
Thank you. So, jumping into our conversation and really the purpose behind why I wanted to have this episode. If you've been listening to this podcast, you know that our focus is really all on what is our purpose? What is our power? How can we really be engaged in the world around us? Also, understanding how the world around us also impacts us in our mental health. It's one and the same. And so, as this election is coming up, there is no shortage of anxiety. There's also no shortage of misinformation. There's so many people saying different things. It can really cause people to become overwhelmed, maybe if it's their first time voting or even if it's not. I've been voting my whole life, and sometimes I look at the internet and I'm just like, nope, let me get out of here. This is the bad place. This is very confusing, and so I wanted to just start off with the understanding that information is power. And oftentimes, once we have that information, it goes a long, long way to assuage a lot of the fears and the anxiousness that we feel when we're in these unprecedented times, right? I know a lot of people say we long for precedented times, but I think we may be past that. I think we are just in the unprecedented. And so, with your expertise, I just wanted to start off with a question of when people are thinking about voting and going out to vote on Tuesday, what are some of the kind of frequently asked questions? Maybe we'll start there that you're hearing from people or that you would want people to know when they're going out to vote. Maybe if they don't know where their polling place is, or if they feel like maybe they haven't registered yet. How do they find out if they can register the day of? What are those kind of last minute things that come up for people that you hear?
Yeah, that's such a good question because, we get so much information, or as you noted, misinformation about candidates and positions, but not enough information about the voting process, which is so important. And so, what we say here is we urge people to make a plan to vote, right? And there's still time to make a plan to vote. And as you noted, Najma, it starts with voter registration. So, verify your voter registration. Sometimes people register to vote and then they move and they don't realize they need to update their voter registration. And so, first thing, make sure that, they're registered, they're still on the voting rolls. And here at the League, we have Vote 411, which we call a one-stop shop, where you can go on, put your information in, and get all this information that I'm about to share with you. So voter, get make sure that you're registered. And then also, do you need any particular documentation in order to be able to vote? Do you need a voter ID, depending on where you live? What type of voter ID? So, you get that information as well. So you don't show up at the polls and then find out, oh, I needed documentation that I don't have on me. And I should note, even if there's any question about your eligibility, you can still vote a provisional ballot. So no one should ever walk away without having voted. But then you also want to know where to vote. Where is my polling place? And because sometimes polling places change from if it's a state election versus a federal election. So, you also want to know where you're gonna go to vote. And then also, I know a lot of people we're so hyper focused on the presidential race, but there are other races on the ballot, and congressional races, judges, and then there are also referendums, ballot measures that are on there. So prepare yourself, before you go in, knowing what offices are that you have to vote for, and are there any referendums there? And again, Vote 411 is a place where you can really dig in and get all of this information as well.
Okay, Vote 411, and that's the name of the
Yes.
website where people can
Yes.
go? Okay,
Yeah.
Vote 411. I'll definitely make sure that we include that link. So something, though, that you mentioned when you were talking was the need to make sure that you are still on the voter rolls. And I think that that might be something that is newer to people. I think that people feel like once you register to vote, you're registered to vote. If you haven't moved, then you're good. So can you talk a little bit about what's new this election season around voter protections, with the Supreme Court over the last few years, actually the few election cycles, as the Voting Rights Act essentially was gutted. A lot of the protections that were there before no longer exist. So how does that impact some of the things that people may be feeling now when you talk about checking to see if you're on the voter rolls or not? Where is that happening? What states maybe should be even more vigilant about double checking to make sure that they're on the rolls?
Yes. So unfortunately, the politicians have been using voting administration as a weapon in their political battles. And so, I want to tie it, when we're talking about, missing this information, to this narrative that undocumented people are voting, non-citizens are voting, which is not true. But then politicians use that false narrative as a way to say we have to go through and purge voter rolls if there's any question of someone's eligibility. And so, we saw that in Virginia, where the governor has started a process that requires election officials to go through and purge voter rolls. And the National Voter Registration Act, which we know as Motor Voter, when you go to get your driver's license, they ask, do you want to vote? Or if you go to a public agency and they ask, do you want to vote? And you can register to vote there. That law says that you can't systematically remove voters 90 days before a federal election. And yet, Virginia started that process, and the League of Women Voters, or Virginia League, and other civil rights orgs took them to court and got the district court and appellate court to say, yes, you can do this. But unfortunately, the governor went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, oh, yes, you can continue to remove these voters from the rolls. And what we're seeing is that people who are citizens are being tagged as non-citizens and being removed from the rolls. And so that's why it's really important in Virginia and other states where, whether you're in Georgia or Florida, for other examples, where the politicians are using this false narrative to go and try to remove people from the rolls. And it's often people that look like you and me who get caught up in these dragnets. it's really important, again, for folks to just verify their voter registration. And it's just, and like I said, with tools like Vote 411, it's easy to do. You
Mm-hmm.
put your information in and you can find out, okay, I am on the voter rolls. And because, you know, we're not at election day yet, there's time to follow
Mm-hmm.
up.
Mm-hmm.
And if you find out you're not there, you know, Virginia, luckily, they have same day voter registration. So you can go with a identifying document and be able to vote on election, you know, register and vote on election day, which is why same day registration is such a powerful tool. But in other states, you may have to vote provisionally and then follow up afterwards, you know, to make sure that your vote is counted.
Mm-hmm.
So because of missing this information and the way, you know, politicians are using voting administration to make it harder for some voters and not others to be able to vote, it becomes really, really crucial to do that work ahead of time to make sure that you're prepared.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned so many things I want to circle back on, but you mentioned provisional ballots. So for listeners who may not know what that is, what does that mean to vote provisionally?
Yeah, so there's this federal law called the Help America Vote Act. And under that law, if I show up to vote and I know I registered and I go to my polling place and they say, I don't see your name here on the rolls, you know, before the Help America Vote Act, I had no recourse. But now, because of that law, I can ask for a provisional ballot. And then we, you know, we can settle it later, but I don't have to walk away without having voted. And so that's a ballot where you vote. It has the same, you know, offices as you would a regular ballot. But then after the election officials go through the records to verify that you are indeed eligible. And sometimes you have, you know, they say, oh, you have to come back and show whether it's a voter ID or, you know, whatever documentation is the reason that you've been flagged. And so while you know, there is that opportunity, we want to make sure that there's no question whether your vote will be counted or not. And
Mhm.
so we want to make sure that you do the work beforehand so you get a regular ballot. But if you need to, the provisional ballot is an option available.
Got it. Thank you for that explanation. And so, as you're talking about that and, the need to, then that means people will have to count those provisional ballots and all of these different kind of moving pieces that will be happening on election day. So that moves me a little bit into what we can expect on election day as it relates to results. I know in the last presidential election, it was very stressful. I was up refreshing for probably, I think, what, I don't remember how long it took, but I know it was multiple days before we finally got concrete results. And so as we're thinking about the anxiety around election day, I wanted to kind of give people an idea of what they can expect. Will we get results on election night? Should people be prepared to have to wait a few days because of the mail-in ballots, and all of those things? What would you tell people about what to expect on election day as it relates to that?
Yes, we have been conditioned to expect results on election day, but those results we get on election day, even when we do, they're preliminary, right? They're not the final results. And so we need to give the election officials time to do their jobs. And as you mentioned, they have to count, you know, mail ballots as well as the ballots that are cast on election day. So it may take some time to find out the final results, and that is all normal. That's
Mhm.
part of the process because usually the things that we're used to hearing on election night, those are usually projections. And because now the races are so close, it's not easy to make the projections as in the past. You know, if someone is ahead, you know, 20%, 15%, then it's easy to say, yeah, we definitely know this person won. But if in a race that, we're being told this is a 50-50 race, if the polling is to be believed, then you want to give the election officials the time to count all the ballots, and so that we're doubly sure about the outcome. And that means, and this is a new socialization for us, right? That means
Mhm.
that we're not going to get the final answer necessarily on election night, and that's okay because the system is doing its job and it's making sure that it's counting all the votes.
And so because this is new, it's a new way of thinking, for most people. I feel that there's opportunity to exploit that newness and to get people to think that, oh, something's wrong, something's broken, there's something nefarious at play. I think even this morning I was looking, and one of the candidates, he's already suing. I think in Pennsylvania, saying that they're turning Republican voters away, things like that. And so, how would you suggest, or even what are some things that you all will be doing in your work on election day to combat all of the lawsuits that may be flying around on either end, right? What will that look like? What are the protections? How are you all protecting us in our vote on election day from all of the things that will undoubtedly be flying around, as far as wanting to confuse the process, and bad actors really wanting to exploit that?
Yeah, so I want to go back to what you said at the beginning, that information is power, right? Knowledge is power. So one of the things that we're doing is making sure that we're putting out that messaging about, you may not get the results on election night, and that's okay. Here's what the process is. Past elections, before 2020, the way votes are certified weren't even on our radar, right? So, providing information about, the votes are counted and then they're certified. And when they're certified, that's the final tally. And so I would say to folks, listen to your election officials and what they're saying to you, not what you're hearing on Facebook or X, or all the rumors, right? This is when it's really important to pay
Mhm.
attention to election officials, because we're already seeing that there's so much mis and disinformation in the environment right now. And we have bad actors who are prepared to exploit that, both domestically, and we have the news reports about how the Russians or the Iranians may be looking to cause discord and use misinformation to muddy up the system. So look at your election officials. I would say, look at trusted organizations like the League of Women Voters, because, in some of our um, local leagues, we are going to be on the ground, being part of that vote counting, monitoring the vote counting, making sure that we're providing information about what the process is, updating about, okay, here's where we are in the process. So I would say to folks also, who are your trusted um, people you trust with information, your trusted information sources. That's where you need to focus. There's going to be a lot of incoming noise and people trying to disrupt and take advantage of the fact that we may not know the answer on election night. So you need to learn how to block out that noise and look at trusted sources of information from your election officials and civil rights organizations, community organizations that you work with, because we're going to be pumping out that information, updating um, voters. And we are also, we are entering those lawsuits because we also think it's really important to make sure that the voters' voice is part of the conversation, right? What we saw in 2020 when there were attempts to overturn the election, the votes that they went after were the votes of people of color. So, they were going after the votes in Atlanta, in Detroit, in Philadelphia, in Milwaukee. And so, organizations such as mine, we feel it's important that we're part of those lawsuits to make sure that those votes are being protected as well. So between, our communications campaign, know that we're there in the courts, fighting, for the voice of the voters. And then you mentioned earlier the Voting Rights Act. That's an area where we're going to be constantly fighting to restore those protections as well. Because one of the things I say, in our democracy, like voting is one of the things we do, but it's not the only thing. And, we get caught up in if things don't turn out the way I want, or, I'm not happy with the results, then game is over. No, it's not. Right? We have election officials that we need to make sure that we're lobbying and we're letting them know what we want and how we want to move forward. So orgs like ours, we use the courts, we use advocacy, and we use public education to make sure that we're being there as support for voters and voting rights.
Thank you for saying that last piece. One question I want to come back to what you were just saying, but one question that I had was, if it is on election day and you run into issues, is there like a real time phone number or something that people can
There
call to get
is.
help in the moment?
Yes. So there's the Election Protection Hotline, which is 866 Our Vote. So if someone goes to the polling place and they run into any problems, whether they're being turned away without being offered a provisional ballot, or there's intimidation happening at their polling place, call 866 Our Vote. They can also text My Vote, and that Election Protection Coalition has trained volunteers who can help them. They are working with election officials to provide help in real time. So between Vote 411 and the Election Protection Hotline, I think, your listeners will be well resourced. And if they need information, I run into any problems.
Thank you for that. And so when you talk about just all of these things that are essentially barriers to people being able to vote, particularly Black and brown folks, women, and I think a lot of people can feel overwhelmed. They can feel like, well, why am I even voting if, all these barriers are in place? What's the point? The whole system is rotten. Why do I even need to be engaged in this process? What would you say to people who are feeling that way right now?
Yeah, I would start by saying, voting is the point of a democracy, right? This is one of the things, one of the few times we have to make sure that our voices are heard. And so we want to make sure that we do our part in a democracy. A democracy is a two-way street. It's we do our part, we let the elected officials know what we want, and they're supposed to be responding to us. And the way we begin that conversation with our election officials is by voting and saying, these are the policies that we want, and this is what we want you to fight for on our behalf. And if we're not letting our voices known, the others who may not have our interests at heart or want to go in a different direction, their voices get amplified, right? Because they're the ones that are driving who gets elected and what they're going to do. So it's really, really important that we not let people take our voice away and that we participate in the process, because that's what democracy is all about. It's having opportunities to have your voice heard. And I think the reason we're confronting so much of these barriers is because the bad actors are trying to make sure certain voices aren't heard. And, I always like to say that the United States really didn't become a true democracy until 1965 with the passage of the Voting Rights Act. And that is when we struck down all those barriers to the vote. That's when we really began to see the change we want and to move forward as a democracy. And that's something that's really important for us to make sure continues and is protected. And so, not just in the presidential elections, but in your congressional elections, in your state elections, in your local elections, when we stop making our voices heard, that's when we really are going to have, see the magnification of all the problems that we see with that we have with, whether it's the policies that we're facing in the country. So don't let anyone take your voice away.
Thank you. I think even you acknowledging, and I say the same, that America has only been a democracy for a very short amount of time. I think that what I hear from people when they talk about voting, it's the missing truth about that. And I think that being honest about where we've come from, how we've gotten to this moment is the only way that we can really reimagine a new future. So thank you for saying that. I think the last question I'll have, and then I'll just leave it open for anything else that you'd like to say to the listeners. But again, this podcast is always, we talk about the historical context. We talk about those who've come before us, the shoulders that we stand on. I open up every episode with Fannie Lou Hamer. Nobody's free until everybody's free. So if you could tell me, this is more personal to you, maybe a bit. Who is the ancestor, your direct ancestor, or just someone that you know who was a freedom fighter? It could be anyone, but who is the ancestor that you are taking with you to the polls? Who is the ancestor that helps you to steady your spine when you are getting into the arena for this fight? Who are the ancestor or ancestors that you take with you and that you remember in this work?
Shirley Chisholm,
Mhm.
unbought and unbossed, or unbossed and unbought.
Mhm.
She is really
Mhm.
one of my heroes because so many things she did in her career in terms of, running for Congress and winning, being a presidential candidate, and using that as a forum to lift up issues that were important to the African American community and to the community um, that she represented. I just think that she's just an amazing example of courage, strength, tenacity. And I always mangle quotes, but one of the quotes that she said that is resonates with me is, if there's no seat at the table, bring your chair. And so it's, as someone who did not let obstacles stop her from going after what she thought was right. She is someone that is one of the foundations of the work that I do, and especially when things are hard and you feel that, oh, things are impossible and it's, will it get better? I look at someone like Shirley Chisholm, who had a really hard fight, but she did not give up and she persisted. And because of her, I can sit where I am today. And so, yeah, that's definitely um, one of the angels on my shoulders.
We love Auntie Shirley, as I call her, on this podcast. I also have my own economic justice and educational strategy consulting firm, and it is called the Chisholm Group. And
Okay.
so it is named after Shirley Chisholm. So thank you for saying her name. I love a day when I can talk about Shirley Chisholm. But just to wrap up, is there anything else that you would want listeners to know that we haven't touched on, or just in general, as we're heading into this election and this new world that we're about to embark upon?
I would say that we're hyper focused on the election and we're hyper focused on what the outcome of next Tuesday is going to be. But we shouldn't stop there because whoever is elected needs to hear from us and need to hear from us consistently. One of the things I'm really mindful of here, being in Washington, D.C., is that the politicians respond to the people they hear from. And they don't, they shouldn't just hear from you in terms of your vote. They should hear from you in terms of the policies that they're going to put forth. And we're really going to need to make sure that our voices are heard when that policy making is happening, and making sure that the policy that is being put forth falls in line with the things that we care about and we want to see in our lives. And so November 5th, yes, it's important that our voices are heard then, but it's also important that our voices are heard after November 5th as well.
So important. And just as you were saying earlier, in a democracy of and for and by the people, the by has to be in there, y'all. We got to tap in, and people wouldn't be trying so hard to take our voices away. You really have to ask yourselves, if voting didn't matter, if engagement didn't matter, why would people be trying so hard, spending so much money to stop our voices? And so thank you so much, Marcia. I really, really appreciate this. I wanted, just like I said, to provide a space to provide information as people are going out to vote. But as you said, it's bigger than that. We're really talking about what is the society that we're envisioning? What is our role in that society? And how can we be more engaged from an informed perspective? So thank you so much. And I will share all of the links that you talked about and the numbers as well in the episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Freed Black Girl Podcast. Remember to like, share, subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. Sending you much love, good energy, and peace. Until next time.
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say them loud, say them clear, for the whole round world to hear. I wish I could share all the love that's in my heart